So from 2010 to 2021, Swami was associate professor and head of the program in philosophy at the Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Educational and Research Institute. That's a long title.
No, it used to be Vivekananda University.
There you go.
That rolled off the tongue. They changed.
And that is in Bellarmine in West Bengal. He's a section editor for the International Journal of Hindu Studies, and he has a lot of other accomplishments. They're all in his biodata that are published on the website. So we're going to have questions and answers, and I'd like to start the first question with what Swami Swahananda always liked to ask a visiting monastic, and that is, how did you come into Vedanta and to join the order?
So, Hari Om Tat Sat, is it fine?
That's all.
Let's so that okay, is this fine? Yeah, I think this is better. Yeah. Thank you so much to Mataji for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here again. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. Shows that the center is dynamic and thriving. Fired, and I would play football outside, American football, with my friends outside, and go in for the khichdi at lunchtime. So that was my religion in my childhood. I should say, though, to my mother's credit, she would do puja twice a day, privately in her own house, morning and evening, religiously, without fail. And at the time, I didn't think much of it, but now I really appreciate that. She did it very sincerely, and with devotion. Then in high school, I had a kind of philosophical bent. I was a budding philosopher. And in college, I actually majored in English literature and minored in philosophy. And I started being a kind of spiritual seeker. And I started reading around in the world's religious scriptures. Bible, parts of the Quran, Dhammapada, Bhagavad Gita. In Hinduism, I read Bhagavad Gita. And I was really impressed. And especially, I was agnostic at the time. And so I didn't care for the bhakti elements, the devotional stuff. But I love the idea of attaining a transcendental peace through renunciation. And the Vedantic side, which is that we suffer because we mistakenly identify with the body-mind. And through renunciation, we can realize our true eternal spiritual nature, our divine nature. So those things all impressed me, and I started developing this idea that I want to be a monk. And I still hadn't read a single word of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings or the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. I'd never met any swamis or nuns. Except, interestingly, this is a bit of a side note, but when I was 6 months old, so I was born in 1980, my parents took me to the Boston Vedanta Society. At the time, the head was Sarvagatanandaji. And the tradition was among Boston, the Bengali community, that they would bring their babies for Annaprashan to the Boston Vedanta Society, even though they were not necessarily devotees. My parents were not devotees, for instance, but they brought me anyway. And the uncle is supposed to feed the baby, but my uncle was in England, so there's no question of him feeding me. So my dad was about to feed me, and Sarvagana said, "Let me feed your son." So actually, that was my first and only contact in my childhood with a Ramakrishna Mission Swami, but supposedly he was very saintly, so he may have put the bug in my head, who knows. But fast forwarding back to college, so I'm reading the scriptures. During my PhD, I read Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. That was my first taste of Swamiji, and I loved Raja Yoga. It was so powerful, so rational. He was trying to prove that religion is a science just as much as the natural sciences. that it can be experientially verified in the way that chemistry and biology and mathematics can be. So that impressed me. And then also our tradition's emphasis on the harmony of religions, because I was faced with this difficulty. There are all these different religions. Which one should I expect? Which one should I accept? If I accept one, I naturally should reject the others. But after studying the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, I realized that that was a mistaken assumption. So that was also very powerful for me. And then right after my PhD, I was staying with my parents in Southern California, who were living there at the time. And I bought a one-way ticket to India. And I'd been warning my parents for a few years that go off to India and be a monk, but they didn't believe me. And then finally, I showed them my one-way ticket. And then they said, oh, this guy's serious. And then I thought, before going to India, let me pay my respects to this very senior Swami at the Vedanta Society of Southern California in Hollywood, Swahanandaji. So I went there, I attended the Arati, I believe, and then afterward, I went to his room, I did pranams, and he asked me about my background. And I said, very briefly in a couple of minutes, that I just finished my PhD at Berkeley, blah, blah, blah. I want to be a monk in India. And then he looked at me and he said, I will give you Diksha. And I was a naive and ignorant young boy then. I didn't realize what a blessing it would be to receive initiation from him. So I was like, I don't know, Maharaj. I didn't even call him Maharaj. I didn't know that you call monks Maharaj at the time. But anyway, I said, I was planning on getting initiated in Bilamat. My idea. And then he said, see, in India, Diksha is a group affair. You get initiation in batches of 50 or 100. Here it'll be one-on-one. So he's trying to sell it. But I still wasn't convinced. So I said, let me think about it. So I went back home. And then like 1 or 2 days later, I was on the phone with my uncle, who's a spiritual aspirant in his own right. He's a follower of Sri Aurobindo. So I told him this, and he's like, are you crazy? There's a senior monk who's a disciple of Vijnana, and he's offering to give you Diksha and you're hesitating? And he said, your birthday's coming up. Ask him to give you initiation on your birthday. I said, oh, that's not a bad idea. So then I contacted Swami. I said, okay, I'll take Diksha, as if it's a great, I'm doing him a favor. You know? So, so then, and then I said, you know, my birthday's coming up. Would you be able to give me Diksha on my birthday? He said, yeah, sure. So he agreed. And then the other funny thing, I'm Indian. So if you're a Westerner, he's not going to tell you to wear a dhoti on the day of initiation, but I'm Indian. So he said, wear a dhoti the day of initiation. I've never worn a dhoti in my life. I didn't own a dhoti. So I told my dad, the only dhoti he owns is the dhoti he wore to my sister's wedding, which is this like bling bling sort of like a king's dhoti, gold. It's literally gold. It's a gold dhoti with like a embroidery. So I've got a dhoti, and I didn't know better. So on the day of initiation, I come in this ridiculous golden dhoti, sparkling and shiny. And Swami just looks at me and laughs. And the Guru Dakshina, the fruits, you know. So anyway, I got initiation. I felt very blessed after that. And then there's another curveball that he suddenly threw at me. So now he's my guru. And I already showed him my one-way ticket. I want to be a monk in India. Nonetheless, he looks at me and he says, well, listen, I know you're thinking now India is the best place for you as a monk and this and that, but you were raised here. I think he had in mind Deepak Maharaj and Harinam. So anyway, he's like, wow, but see, you may have difficulty adjusting there. So better to join here under me. And I'll send you to India, but if you have any difficulty, I'll call you back. You'll be my man. Again, he was trying to sell, you know, the center now. So now he's my guru. How can I say no? But I wasn't feeling right about it, but I somehow reluctantly agreed. For a very brief period, I don't even remember how long that period was. It might have been literally one day. But it wasn't sitting well with him. But he was so excited, he sent off the form to Bilamat immediately. He had me fill out the form, send it to Bilamat. I've got a new young brahmachari, just finished his PhD, he's joining here. So anyway, about a day later, I'm sitting in the temple, feeling very uneasy about this. And then I came outside. There are these benches outside of the Hollywood Temple. So I'm sitting on one of those benches alone, thinking. And then an elderly gentleman, whom I thought was a devotee, wearing pants and a tucked in dress shirt and glasses, looked about in the 70s. Looked at me very sweetly and he said, "What's the matter? It seems like there's something on your mind." And I told him what's on my mind. I said, "I was really feeling like I want to be a monk in India. And now suddenly he wants me to join here. He's my guru." So then I said, "What should I do?" Oh, then he said, "Well, let me tell you my joining story." So that person turned out to be Swami Sarvadevananda. I guess what he told me later is that Swahananji didn't like monks to be wearing gerua outside of the ashrama. So that's why maybe he went for a doctor's appointment, who knows. He was wearing pants and shirts. So he's Sarvadevananda, the current head of Hollywood. And after hearing his story and realizing he's a monk, I said, "What do you suggest I do?" And he gave me one simple piece of advice. He said, "You should follow your heart." And that gave me the courage to go back to Swananandaji. And I said, "Modest, please don't mind, but I had my heart set on joining in India." And then he said, "I understand. You want your freedom." He would do this thing with his arms, hands. And then I had also told him that I want to do a 6-month pilgrimage in India. And he's so kind and so generous. He didn't hold it against me. He was very supportive. He wrote a letter to all Swamis in India. "Please allow Brahmachari Ayan to remain in your ashrama for up to 3 nights." And I carried that letter with me throughout, in all the different ashramas I visited, even outside the Ramakrishna mission. Like Divine Life Society in Rishikesh, I stayed for 3 weeks, and I just showed that letter, and he's so highly respected by all the Swamis and spiritual organizations that I had no trouble. And then I decided to join at Vivekananda University. It was called Vivekananda University at the time in Belima. The brand new university started by the Ramakrishna order. And I was the first brahmachari to join there, actually. And yeah, the rest is history, as Mataji mentioned. But yeah, if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask. Yes, I did. Yes.
If you have any questions, raise your hand and we'll bring a mic.
Namaskar, Maharaj. So my
Tell
question,
me your name first.
yeah, my name is Dilip.
Dilip.
Yeah. So my question is, now we say Atman and Brahman are one, but we have so many individual souls here. So how do we explain that? So for my eyes, they are all different souls right now, called as jivas.
Mhm.
But I heard some people, I mean, some of the most revered Swamis say that Atman and Parabrahman are
Mhm.
one.
Mhm.
So I see the contradiction there. So
Yeah.
how would you answer that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not just revered Swamis who say it, the scriptures say it. I am Atma, Brahma, right? And there are many other places where the Upanishads say that, Gita says it. How do we interpret it? It's a good question. Well, it depends. It depends on the school of Vedanta you're talking about, because different schools of Vedanta will give different answers to the question. So it's good to have an understanding of the range of philosophies within the tradition of Vedanta. So to give you some sense of it, a very brief summary. Classical Advaita Vedanta, that's the school of Shankara. What's his answer? Absolute identity between the individual soul and non-dual Brahman, understood as attributeless pure consciousness. So then you ask a very obvious question, what about the fact that I seem to have a separate individuality, he seems to have a different individuality, use it? How does Advaita Vedanta account for that? They say, yes, it's an illusion. It's true from the empirical, Vyavaharika standpoint, but from the ultimate standpoint, when you realize your true nature is Brahman, you realize Jagat Mithya. Actually, this entire world of names and forms, illusory. Our apparent individuality, that we're different jivatmas sitting in this room together, illusory. None of it ever happened. It was never true. What's the analogy that he used to use? The rope and the snake. There's a rope, which I mistakenly see as a snake. When I get closer and I finally see it as a rope, what happens? Does the snake run away? No, I realized there never was a snake. I misperceived the rope as a snake. Likewise, there's nothing but Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness. But out of ignorance of Brahman, we're falsely superimposing all sorts of illusory appearances. Well, like I'm superimposing microphoneness onto Brahman, and it looks like a microphone to me. I'm superimposing Medhanandatva on Brahman, and I think that I'm Medhananda, and so on and so forth. When you realize Brahman, what happens? All those upadhis, those limiting adjuncts, what we superimposed, disappears, vanishes. And what's left? Non-dual Brahman. So that's a short summary of the Advaita Vedantic answer to the question, in what sense is each of us Brahman? In the sense of absolute identity. Individuality is an illusion. But other schools give very different answers. Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita Vedanta. This is the Bhakti school of Vedanta. Ramanuja, of course, any school of Vedanta has to accept the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra as authoritative scriptures, no doubt. But these scriptures have been interpreted in totally different ways by these different schools. So Ramanuja says Shankara is wrong. Shankara in his school is wrong in claiming that the best way to interpret I am Atma Brahma, that Atman is Brahman, is in the sense of absolute identity. This is a mistake, he says. Ramanuja does not even accept Nirguna Brahman of Shankara. He doesn't accept that. He accepts Brahman. What is Brahman for Ramanuja? Vishnu, Narayana, the personal God. You see. And in what sense is each of us that Vishnu? We are Amshas, and he is Amshi. He is the whole, we are parts. You see. Madhva, he was the founder of the Dvaita Vedanta school, the dualistic school of Vedanta. He also accepts the Upanishads. He also accepts that the Atman is in some sense Brahman. In what sense? He says there's a servant-master relationship between souls and, again, Brahman understood as Vishnu Narayana. So he and Ramanuja both think that Brahman is the personal God. And we are his servants. So what does Ramakrishna say? Now, how would a Ramakrishnite, a follower of our tradition, answer the same question that you asked, a very good question? In what sense is Atman Brahman? All of the above. How do we know that? In the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna was fond of quoting Hanuman. Deha buddhya dasosmi, jiva buddhya todamshakaha, atma buddhya tvamevaham iti me nishchitamatihi. When I identify with the body, I say, O Rama, this is Hanuman addressing Rama, I say, I am your servant, humble servant. When I identify with the jivatma, the individual soul, then I say, I am an amsha, I am a portion of you, and you are the whole. And when I identify with the Paramatman, the Supreme Atman, then I say, I am you, you are me. What a beautiful reconciliation of Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Advaita without getting into the game of higher and lower, of hierarchies. No hierarchy there. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna himself, in one place in the Gospel, looks around, sees that everybody is part of his inner circle, his antaranga, says, you are all my very own. Let me tell you, I have come to the final realization. Shesh e bujaji. Amitara. So, and then he explains this, he quotes Hanuman, based on his own direct spiritual realization. All of these different attitudes are true. Without saying, like a classical Advaitin, that the absolute identity relationship is the highest. You see, he gives another example. He says, I have a flute. I could play one note on the flute constantly. What is that? Soham. I am Atma Brahma in the sense of Advaita Vedanta. I am identical with non-dual pure consciousness. He says, but boring. What I want to do is play ragas and raginis on this flute. I want to revel in various attitudes toward God. I want to relate to God. I want to have different kinds of relationships with God. Vatsalya. So I want to think of God sometimes as my mother, sometimes as my father, sometimes as my child, sometimes as my friend, sometimes as my lover. Sometimes I like to think that I'm identical with, and each of these is true. So, short answer to your question. Thank you.
What you just described is this beautiful evolution from Dvait to Advait, which also has been fairly esoteric and limited to, the chosen few. For instance, the Nambudri Brahmins in Kerala who, came down from the lineage of Shankaracharya until such time the select gurus who've taken it to the masses. So for most of the mainstream folks who are householders, is that also the logical path? Embrace Dvait and then go to Advait? for the ultimate state of Satchidananda or Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
I think you completely misunderstood what I said. Because what I was saying is that it's not an evolution from Dvaita to Vishtadvaita to Advaita.
Isn't that the reality for most people?
I don't think so. Because you just said that Advaita is meant for a tiny elite, right? So how could that be the reality for most people?
I'm saying so for people from the mainstream
Yeah.
to get there,
Yeah.
you often have to go from what is
No,
ubiquitous to the
I
esoteric,
think
right?
there's been a misunderstanding. So let me just try to clarify my understanding of our tradition. I don't think our tradition says that Advaita is higher than Bhakti.
Mhm.
Our tradition, on my interpretation, places Bhakti traditions on an equal footing with the path of Jnana.
Okay.
So there's no evolution and no hierarchy and no ladder going from Bhakti ultimately to Advaita. What does Sri Ramakrishna say? Bhaktas don't want to become sugar, they want to eat sugar. Let them eat sugar. Why force them to become sugar? You don't want it. What does that mean? It means there are two fundamentally different kinds of liberation, depending on temperament. Okay? One state of liberation is the Advaitic state of liberation,
Mhm.
sometimes called nirvana. Sri Ramakrishna will describe it as a salto going to measure the depth of the ocean. The moment it sets foot in the ocean, what happens? It melts in the ocean. There's just non-dual pure consciousness. No heavens, no coming and going. You rest in your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. That's liberation from the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna fully accepts it as one form of liberation, but it's not the only form. You know why? Several things. In the Gospel, Mohima Chakravarti, staunch follower of Shankara, asks him, but bhaktas also need nirvana eventually, don't they? He's an Advaitin, so he asked a very similar question to yours. Bhaktas ultimately they have to give up their bhakti and finally realize their absolute identity with Brahma, right? Wrong. Sri Ramakrishna says no, false. Says in some bhakti schools, there's Nitya Krishna, Nitya Bhakta, the eternal Krishna with his eternal bhaktas. Chinmoy Sham, Chinmoy Dham. Krishna is consciousness, divine consciousness, and so is his abode, Chinmoy Dham, Chinmoy Dhama in Bangla. That means his abode, Goloka, that transcendental eternal loka, itself is the same consciousness. And then he says, imagine an infinite ocean. That infinite ocean is Satchitananda. In certain places, under the cooling influence of the breeze of bhakti, he was a great poet, so he had this beautiful analogy. That ocean forms into different formations of ice. Each of those forms of ice corresponds to what? Different forms of the personal God. One can be Vishnu, one can be Krishna, one can be Christ, and so on. Then the analogy continues. With the rising of the sun of knowledge, Gyanchuju, the ice forms melt. And the Advaitas will feel vindicated. See, Sri Ramakrishna thinks that Advaita is the highest. Wrong, because the story goes on. Then he says, but in some places the ice doesn't melt. It becomes like quartz. It becomes like quartz. And then he says, Nitya Shakar in Bangla, Nitya Sakara. There are eternal forms of God. So now let's come back to what is, you might ask, what is the other form of liberation? I thought that liberation means you're one with Brahman. Wrong. There's also eating sugar. Eating sugar is, for bhaktas who want to eat sugar, they reside as liberated jivas in an eternal heaven, in an eternal loka. There are different lokas for different personal gods. There's Ramakrishna loka for us. There's Vishnu loka, the Vaikuntha loka. There's Goloka for Krishna, for worshippers of Krishna. What do? They're in bliss. They're in an eternal, blissful, loving communion relationship with Krishna. They serve Krishna, they worship Krishna. You might think that sounds boring, won't you get? That's because we're projecting our own human limitations into this eternal state. We have no idea. We can't possibly fathom the bliss of this. But Sri Ramakrishna fully accepts both ideals. That's the important thing.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
One question online is, do you intend to write commentaries on the Gita Upanishads based on Sri Ramakrishna's integrated Vedanta?
I hope so. God willing. So that is in my plans, but man proposes, God disposes. So, God willing, Sri Ramakrishna willing, yes, I would like to write commentaries on Bhagavad Gita first, then Upanishads, and then Brahma Sutra. Because I think these commentaries are urgently needed. I didn't come up with the idea. Swami Vivekananda said again and again that we should not rely on traditional commentators in understanding the scriptures. Why? He said Shankaracharya and all the other commentators, even though their commentaries are full of insights, they also at times tortured the scriptures to suit their own philosophies. He used very strong language. In the Inspired Talks, he uses even stronger language, and he says they were at times conscious liars. Because their main aim is to establish their own philosophical school. And by hook or by crook, they have to somehow prove that the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra support their respective philosophies. So Swamiji says, now is the time to reinterpret the Vedantic scriptures in the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. And yet, after 120 years, nobody has done it. So I feel that it's high time. Somebody had a question like this.
Pranam Swamiji. My name is Kailash. So I recently found Vedanta. I mean, I've kind of been sure, yeah. I've been mostly agnostic and at some points even firmly atheistic because I live in the Bible Belt, and so God is a very weighted word in Texas. So let's leave that aside. I guess the real question I have is, I've had several decades of practice building up a self-concept and strengthening it, and it's not a great self-concept. I mean, ego is always not, well, my ego, I guess, needs work. I guess that's the question is, should one work on fixing your ego, making it more adaptive instead of the maladaptive behaviors we might have picked up due to whatever samskaras we had ongoing as we grew up and all that? Or do we just drop it and just try to find the authentic self?
Yeah.
So that's the struggle I have, because those maladaptive behaviors obviously they have several decades of practice, and so they always come to the front and impinge on the way you operate in the world. How much effort should one put to try to remediate that and try to fix our ego?
Yeah. Okay, it's a good question. I mean, there are different ways of answering it. One way of answering it from a Vedantic perspective is to say that there are two ways of dealing with the ego in spiritual life. One is to try to transcend the ego or to eliminate it. It's one way. But Sri Ramakrishna says it's very difficult. And so for most people, it's better to, he says, let the ego stay, but turn it into Bhaktirami. So in Bangla, Bojjatami means rascal ego. What is the rascal ego? The ego that's attached to lust and greed, to worldly things. He says, convert that I, that rascal ego, into the Bhaktirami, child of God, servant of God. So you don't have to eliminate ego, you can just spiritualize it. That's the beauty of it. That's one way of answering it. Now, there's another way of approaching your question, because you're using the language of maladaptation. This is a kind of psychological, psychotherapeutic language. And so it struck me that I really like this concept developed by this American Buddhist psychotherapist called spiritual bypassing. Do people know, are you familiar with this concept of spiritual bypassing? It's a very powerful concept. The idea is, I've got all sorts of problems in my life. My wife just dumped me. I just lost my job. I have an alcohol problem, whatever it might be. Don't quote me on these things. I'm not the one who has these problems. In trouble. So what do? I go to the temple. Instead of confronting my issues, my problems, my alcohol addiction, and this and that, I run off to the temple. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't come to the temple if you have these problems. But it's all about your motivation. Are you unconsciously running away from your problems and retreating into spirituality, escaping into spirituality? Then that's spiritual bypassing. What is spiritual bypassing? You bypass your day-to-day life problems, issues, difficulties, challenges by fleeing into, escaping into spiritual life. That's not healthy. Genuine spiritual life involves being brutally honest with yourself about your limitations, your weaknesses, your strengths too, and not running away from your problems, but acknowledging them, and then trying to find a spiritual solution to them. Then that's not spiritual bypassing. So I don't know if that's relevant to what you were asking, but I think there are two different ways of answering that question. Thank you.
My name is Don. I've read the Upanishads and the Gita, and I'm currently reading the Gospel of Ramakrishna halfway through. So I decided to pick up the Brahma Sutras, and I immediately put it down.
I was about to say good.
Yes, but I couldn't find anything online or other monks that speak or give teachings about the Brahma Sutra. Why is it such a hard book to teach from?
Okay, good question. Why is the Brahma Sutra such a hard book to teach from, or even to study, to learn from? Well, it's because it's in the form of sutras. There's a whole form of literature in India called the sutras. Yoga sutras are also written in sutras, but mercifully, most of those sutras are relatively self-contained. They're mostly grammatically complete sentences. They're not all that cryptic. Some of them are, but most of them are not. You can pretty much understand the meaning of the sutras without elaborate commentaries. The commentaries help, but a lot of these sutras and the Yoga sutras are standalone. That is not the case with the Brahma sutras. The Brahma sutras, the sutras in those Brahma sutras are extraordinarily compressed, laconic, downright cryptic. They're sutras that are literally, one of them is cha. Cha means and in Sanskrit. And. Now interpret that. How do you get Vedanta from and? Good luck. And so there have been voluminous commentaries written on the Brahma Sutras. And I've written an article on interpreting the Brahma Sutras from the standpoint of Swami Vivekananda, our tradition. If you're interested, you can look at it. It has a long academic title, Asmin Nasya Cha Tad Yogam Shasti. It's 1.19. It's basically focusing on 1.1.19 of the Brahma Sutra in the light of Swami Vivekananda. So what you find is, actually, there's a really interesting encounter between Swami Vivekananda and one of his disciples named Shuddhananda. Shuddhananda was a scholarly monk, and he's carrying a book with him. And Swami Vivekananda asks, what book are you reading? And he says, oh, I'm reading Shankara's commentary on the Brahma Sutra, expecting that Swami Vivekananda will be very pleased. He loses patience with him and says, I never told you to read Shankara's commentary. He said, I want you to try to understand the original meaning of the sutras themselves. What was the original intention of Vyasa? Vyasa is, now we say Badarayana is the author of Brahma Sutras. At the time, many people thought it was Vyasa. But in any case, I want you to try to understand the original meaning of the sutras independently of the commentaries. And then Swamiji himself gives a nice example. He quotes 1.1.19 of the Brahma Sutra. Asmin nasya cha tad yogam shasti. What the sutra literally means is the scriptures, meaning the Upanishads, teach it comes back to your question, the yogam, the union between Jivatma and Brahman. That's what the sutra teaches. How do you interpret that union, that yogam between Jiva and Brahman? There are many different ways of it. So Swamiji, what does he say? He says, yes, you can interpret this from Shankara's standpoint and understand it as absolute identity. And he says, but you can equally interpret it as part and whole. So he accepts Ramanuja's interpretation as well. And I use that as a kind of pregnant hint to develop a Vivekanandan / Ramakrishnan interpretation of the Brahma Sutra. You might find it interesting. If you type in my name in Google, you'll find I have an academic website called academia.edu. And there I have all my articles, and you can find that one in the Brahma Sutra. Yeah, thank you. Look, I mean, reading Brahma Sutra is not mandatory. I think it's better to stick with Gita, really, primarily. And you can read multiple commentaries on the Gita. So if you just stick to one, there's a great danger in being biased by that one perspective. So what I like to do is triangulate with multiple commentaries. So I'm teaching a class now called Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Ramakrishna. And the main textbook is Sri Aurobindo's Essays on the Gita. because he was profoundly influenced by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. And so I think he's done a better job than any of our monks in interpreting the Gita in the light of Sri Ramakrishna without naming Sri Ramakrishna. And his English is so difficult that most people have difficulty reading, like understanding what he's saying. But if you can get past that difficulty, it's a very, very profound text, insightful text from the standpoint of our tradition. But I also bring in Shankara's commentaries, Ramanuja's commentary, Tapasyananda's commentary. Yeah, thank you.
Maharaj, thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for creating or writing about the framework of Vijnana Vedanta so that we can understand Sri Ramakrishna's teaching. And I'll need about a minute to develop the question, if you don't mind. So I found a precept of Sri Ramakrishna in this book, Words of the Master, which I couldn't find an explanation for, and I'll just read out the precept for everybody. So why is the necessity, so Sri Ramakrishna is telling Totapuri that why is the necessity of daily meditation in your present advanced state? To which Totapuri replies that we need, just like a brass vessel would lose its luster if you don't meditate every day. And to that, Sri Ramakrishna quipped that it doesn't matter if you're a gold vessel.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand the meaning of that, the underlying, the context, and I couldn't find anywhere. So then I started thinking about the Vijnana Vedanta framework that you provided, and I think I found a link. I would like to know your opinion. So the first thing that Thakur says many times while talking about Vijnana Vedanta is that this quote, he who is aware of knowledge is also aware of ignorance. For example, he tells M on September 9th, 1883, and he then instructs that to attain Vijnana, one must throw the thorn of knowledge to remove the thorn of ignorance, use the thorn of knowledge to remove the ignorance, and then discard the thorn of knowledge itself.
It's both.
Both, yeah. So, and then I think that is kind of linked to the second step, which is Thakur intimating that there's a difference in the nature, this is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, of the I consciousness or the ego between the Jnani and the Vijnani in the relative plane, because Thakur says that the 8 fetters fall away for the Vijnani, and then he suggests that the ego of the Vijnani is a mere appearance. He doesn't say that for the Jnani. So, and I think we have some examples because we see that Totapuri himself getting angry at the watchman for lighting the smoke, and then also Vishishta, who is a Brahmagani, Vashishta, yeah, sorry, Vashishta, who is a Brahmagani, having sorrow over the death of his sons, right? And I think that for the Vijnani, it is not the case because Vijnani has thrown away both the knowledge and the ignorance, and so Vijnani has basically devoid of just to say that, so Vijnani being beyond both knowledge and ignorance is indifferent to the world and beyond, and so he's always in peace.
And the Vijnani sees the world as a mode of joy.
Okay, yeah, yeah, right. So yeah, so okay. So what do you think about this link? I mean, this is a correct way of interpreting the precept out here, at least the incident that happened between Totapuri and Thakur, when Thakur mentioned that if you're a gold vessel, you don't need to meditate every day.
That's experience incidents in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. How do you interpret it? There are many different ways, and I can just give my own suggestion. See, look at the overall narrative of Sri Ramakrishna's encounter with Totapuri, okay? Totapuri apparently had already attained Brahma Jnana before meeting Sri Ramakrishna. He had attained the state of Nirvikapa Samadhi, and he comes to Sri Ramakrishna as a Jivan Mukta. This is just part of, if you look at Shalanan's biography, you'll see that. No doubts about it. And he teaches Sri Ramakrishna Advaita, Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna has no difficulty removing his mind from worldly things, but what happens? He gets stuck at Kali, his beloved mother Kali. So what does Totapuri do? He takes a shard of glass, and he pierces him slightly here, and Sri Ramakrishna imagines or sees Kali being cut in half by the sword of knowledge, Jnana Roshi, and soars in the state of Nirvikapa Samadhi in a very, very brief period of time. Totapuri is completely stunned. And then there are other incidents that happen, which are quite interesting. Totapuri, even though he's a wandering monk who would never stay in one place for more than a couple of days, he stays for a long time because he's completely mesmerized by Sri Ramakrishna. But Totapuri is a jnani. And remember, Sri Ramakrishna is even beyond that. So what happened, the way I see this is, Totapuri was his Advaita guru, Sri Ramakrishna's guru. After Sri Ramakrishna attains Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he turns around and becomes Totapuri's guru. And he says, now let me do you a favor. You're a jnani, let me make you into a vijnani. How do we know this? Because Totapuri one day is suffering from terrible dysentery, I think, and other issues with his body. And he says, I've already realized Brahma. I know this is all an illusion. Let me just get rid of the body. Good riddance. Goes off to this river to kill himself, finds out he can't, no matter how far he goes, he can't find enough water to drown him. And then he has this kind of mystical realization, seems like, that this is all Divine Mother's play. So I see this incident as Sri Ramakrishna playing with Totapuri and teaching him to accept the reality of Shakti. Before that, he would taunt him. When Sri Ramakrishna would clap his hands, he would say, what are you making chapatis? Sri Ramakrishna made him accept Shakti and turned him into a Vijnani. So in that context, I think this might be another way of Sri Ramakrishna encouraging him to move beyond, ascend from the standpoint of Jnana. Why is the Jnana? See, another place, he says the Jnani is full of fear. He says this in the Gospel. Why? Because Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. The world is unreal. Imagine this. There are three different paradigms, right? One is I'm dreaming, and I don't know I'm dreaming. Right? Ordinary people dream like that. Second scenario, I'm in a dream, I'm dreaming, but I'm lucidly dreaming. That means I know I'm in the dream, right? It could be a nightmare. And unless I know special lucid dreaming techniques, there's no easy way for me to get out of the dream. I have to wait it out. So imagine that it's a terrible dream, it's a nightmare. Even though I'm lucid, I'm still terrified and I'm still very, very unhappy. And then there's a third scenario. I'm dreaming and then I wake up from the dream. The goal for Advaita Vedanta is waking up from the dream. What was Totapuri's state at the time? He was a lucid dreamer. Of the three scenarios, he didn't wake up because he's still stuck in this darn body. He's still seeing this illusory world. That's the fear. That's why he's still concerned about keeping the mind pure. Why? So that the mind is a good reflector, a clean reflector of Brahman. So that he can enjoy the bliss of Brahman while he's still in this illusory body, in this illusory world. Sri Ramakrishna says, I want to dance with both hands up. And he gives a beautiful story about two weaver women. This is in the gospel as well. One weaver woman goes to the other weaver woman's house. And this weaver woman sees that her friend has a beautiful ball of yarn, much nicer than her own bottle. And so she comes up with an idea. She wants to steal this ball of yarn. So when her friend's not looking, she did her arm just like this. And then the weaver woman is smart. She noticed that she was hiding under her arm. So she comes up with a nice idea. She says, come, my friend, let's dance together. So they start dancing. And imagine how this person's dancing. So Sri Ramakrishna says, why should I dance with one hand like this? I'll dance with both hands up. That's the big Jnani. The Jnani is in fear because he's confronted with his failure at every step. The failure is, I'm still seeing this darn world. I thought I transcended the world, but I'm still seeing the world. Until my prarabdha karma runs out and I can finally get rid of this godforsaken body. Sri Ramakrishna says, Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam. Turiyanji's last words. Brahma Shatya Jagat Shatya Shavi Shatya Shatya Pran Pratishtita. Brahman is real. Jagat Satyam, the Jagat, this world also is real. Everything is real. Shavi Shatya. Shatya Pran Pratishtita. Life itself is grounded in the truth. That's Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana. You have nothing to fear. Whether you're in this world, whether you're in the body, whether you're out of the body, everything is God. Everything is divine consciousness. Thank you.
Pranam Swamiji. My name is Vibha. Yes. Vibha. Yes. Um, Thakur says that there are two kinds of reasoning.
Two kinds of
Reasoning. Yes. Involution and evolution. That is Anulom and Vilom. Like the bark of a tree goes with a pit and pit goes with a bark. Can you please elaborate how these two kinds of thinking relates to the paths of negation and affirmation and also to the relationship between Nitya and Leela?
Right. Yeah. So again, there's a place where M asks, it's a world unreal. And Sri Ramakrishna's answer is, why should the world be unreal? Anulom bilom, involution and evolution. And he gives the example of a bale fruit. And he says, if you just take the weight of the pulp of the bale, the weight of the bale fruit falls short. You have to take the weight of the whole bale fruit, including the seeds in the shell, to get the whole weight. And he says, likewise, you shouldn't just say that non-dual Brahman alone is true, and that this world of names and forms, the personal God, individual souls are all unreal. Because then the weight of the bale fruit falls short. You have to accept everything as aspects of that same infinite divine reality. So what is Anulom Vilom, this involution, evolution? The idea is, as far as I understand it, there's this cyclical view of creation in Hinduism. Okay? Right now, this universe, this Jagat, is in its manifest state. Eventually, there's going to be a big crunch. That's what physicists call it. What happens? This entire manifest universe will contract into a seed state, bija avastha. But it's still there. The entire universe is involved. So using this technical language, involution, in the sense of involution, involved in that seed. In the next cycle of creation, what happens? That seed evolves into the manifest universe as we see it now. You see. Now, why is that relevant to Vijnana and all these things? Mundak Upanishad has a beautiful metaphor to explain the relationship between Brahman and this world of names and forms. He uses the metaphor of a spider. And now, whether it's biologically true of insects like spiders is beside the point. It's a metaphor. So let's not freak out about that. Okay, but the spider metaphor in the Mundaka Upanishad is as follows. The spider will project a web out of itself, out of its own body. And what is that cobweb made of? Itself. And eventually it'll contract that cobweb back into its body. Just so Brahman projects a universe out of itself. It's not something, the universe is not something different from Brahman. In technical language, it is the Upadana Karana. Brahman is the Upadana Karana, the material cause of this universe. The universe is God. It's the material of the universe is God. And then eventually God will. So that's evolution. The state of evolution is when the spider throws out the cobweb. And involution is when it withdraws the cobweb back into it. But the idea is the universe is always nothing but God, either in the state of involution or in the state of evolution. There's just the spider with the cobweb inside, God. Spider with the cobweb outside, equally God. So the world is real. This is why he brings it in the context of M's question. M asks the point blank question, is the world unreal? Point blank answer, no. The world is God. He says the Vijnani sees that Brahma Chaturvinshi Tattva hoyeche. The Vijnani sees that Brahman itself has become the 24 cosmic principles. So how can the world be unreal? So then you ask about Nitya Lila, that's another, he uses this expression also in the context of Vijnana. Because what he says is, when you attain Brahma Jnana, knowledge of Brahma, you have realized the Nitya. That's what he calls the Nitya. Okay? Non-dual Brahman. Then he says, but that Brahman is one with Shakti. Brahma or Shakti Abhed. It's one of his main teachings. Also from the standpoint of Vijnana that he says this. Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. Brahman is the non-dual, impersonal Brahman of Advaita Vedanta. Shakti is the personal God. And then he says further, the Vijnani sees that it is Shakti that has become everything in this world. You see. And then he says, the Vijnani, therefore the Vijnani will happily and blissfully, he doesn't just stay stuck at the Nitya level. He can happily go from the Nitya to the Lila. What is the Lila? The divine play. This world, this entire world is nothing but the play of Shakti, mother's play. And fearlessly enjoy this play without feeling like it's some kind of fall from the heights of Nirvigama Samadhi. No, this is equally God. Sri Ramakrishna says, why should I only see God with my eyes closed? Why can't I see God with my eyes open? That's the Vijnani, the fearless Vijnani. Does that make sense? Thank you.
We've got an online question from Gopal Rao. What is self-realization for Vedanta and Ramakrishna?
Okay, as if Ramakrishna is different from Vedanta. So what is self-realization according to Vedanta and according to Ramakrishna? The thing is, there are different schools of Vedanta, as I already mentioned in the context of another gentleman's question. And so different schools of Vedanta will give different answers to the question. What is self-realization according to Ramanuja school? You know, one thing that made people, if you study anything, you study Shankara, unfortunately, and you don't study anything else most of the time. So people, they've only heard vaguely of Ramanuja, but they don't study him. But it's well worth studying. So one book I'd strongly recommend is Swami Tapasana's book called Bhakti Schools of Vedanta. And he says it in the introduction. He says people are so obsessed with Shankara, they don't read anything else. And they mistakenly conflate Vedanta with Advaita Vedanta, when in fact the traditional Vedanta is much vaster than just one sub-school. So Ramanuja. Many of you probably don't know that Ramanuja gave a prominent position to Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. How many of you know that? Very few. But what is the path of knowledge according to Ramanuja? What he says is this. He says Jnana Yoga is the practice of meditating on your true nature as an eternal individual soul, a jivatman, separate from the body-mind complex. And through that practice, what happens? You eventually attain the spiritual realization of yourself as the jivatman, a spiritual entity separate from the body-mind complex. He called that in Sanskrit Atma Avalokanam. Atma Avalokanam. That's self-realization for Ramanuja. But that's not the highest goal, according to Ramanuja. That's preliminary to, so this is a very profound spiritual insight, actually. He says, you cannot feel true bhakti for God until you have realized your true nature as an individual soul, as a spiritual entity separate from the body-mind complex. So long as we mistakenly identify with the body-mind complex, we can never feel true love for God. So Ramanuja says, Jnana Yoga is a preparatory discipline before you can practice Bhakti Yoga in earnest. And he says the ultimate goal. So first you need self-realization in the form of realizing your true nature as an eternal individual soul. Then you practice bhakti because you're finally qualified to practice bhakti. What is bhakti yoga according to Ramanuja? Constant contemplation of God. Constant. And the emphasis here is on constant. Many of us can think of God for a couple seconds and then we start thinking about what we're going to eat for our next meal and this and that. Constant recollection of God requires that you realize your true nature as an eternal soul. Because the soul is already a great bhakta. The soul already loves God, but we don't know it because we identify with the body-mind complex, you see. So the ultimate goal is, so self-realization is a stepping stone toward God realization, according to Ramanuja. Now let's look at classical Advaita Vedanta. What does that say about self-realization? First of all, the nature of a self is totally different in classical Advaita than it is in Ramanuja. Because classical Advaita does not accept the ultimate reality of individual souls. It says Jivatma itself is an illusion. So self-realization, according to classical Advaita, is realization of the non-dual self. Your self is identical with myself, is identical with yourself. There's only one non-dual self. And that's the ultimate goal, according to classical Advaita. There's no higher God realization. In fact, it's a God realization in the sense of the realization of the personal God, like Vishnu, is a lower realization. Because it's only true from the empirical standpoint. It's not true from the ultimate standpoint. From the ultimate standpoint, the only truth is the non-dual self. Non-dual pure consciousness, that alone exists. Everything else is an illusion. So that's I'm just giving you two contrasting explanations of what self-realization means in two different schools of Vedanta. Now the person also asked about Sri Ramakrishna. As I said also in relation to your question, Sri Ramakrishna beautifully harmonizes both of these forms of self-realization Sri Ramakrishna will fully accept Ramanuja's standpoint and say that yes, you do need to realize yourself as a Jivatman in order to feel true bhakti. You know where he says this? It's very interesting. It's in the gospel. He brings in the Shat Chakra, the 6 chakras. And he says that the first meaningful spiritual realization that a spiritual aspirant has is when one ascends to the heart level, the heart chakra. And he says, then you realize yourself as a Jivatma. Sadhak bole eki. Ar Jyoti darshan hoy. Shikhar nei Jyoti darshan hoy. In Bangla, so the English is, this spiritual aspirant, when he reaches the heart center, realizes that he is the Jivatman, the eternal soul separate from the body-mind complex. And he says, what is this? What is this? It's this extraordinary spiritual realization. And he says, you realize yourself as a Jivatman in the form of a shikha, a flame. So that's the fourth, right? And then finally you go up to the 5th and then the 6th, and then God, the realization of the personal God is the 6th between the eyebrows. And then Nirgapa Samadhi is Sahasrara Chakra. So I think he would agree with Ramanuja about that. At the same time, he would agree with Ramanuja that yes, for bhaktas, the highest goal is eating sugar, realizing the personal God. Happy with that. Ramakrishna will equally accept the Advaitic ideal, the classical Advaitic ideal. Yes, you guys want to become sugar? That's the ideal for you. Self-realization for you is realizing it's like a salt bell melting in the ocean. You lose your individuality in non-dual pure consciousness. That's the highest goal for you. That he also fully accepts that. So Sri Ramakrishna, from the standpoint of Vijnana Vedanta, not from the standpoint of classical Advaita, you can understand Sri Ramakrishna as harmonizing all of these different understandings of self-realization, God realization, liberation, different yogas. He doesn't put any of the yoga. He doesn't put Bhakti Yoga on a higher footing than Jnana Yoga as Ramanuja and Madhva does. He doesn't put Jnana Yoga on a higher footing than Bhakti Yoga as Shankara does. Equal footing. As Swami Vivekananda used to say, each of the 4 yogas is fitted to make man perfect without the help of the others. Each is a direct and independent path to moksha. Directly contradicts Shankara, which says that only one path, one yoga leads directly to moksha, which is Jnana Yoga.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, actually, a statement. I'd like you to comment on it. When I was a young nun, and this question of Jnana and Vijnana came up in our study with Swami Swahananda, I asked him privately, what would you say is the greatest? And Swami Swahananda was a disciple of Swami Vijnananda. He was also a scholar. He said, oneness, of course.
What?
Oneness, of course, is the highest. But Vijnana is the greater achievement. Now, are there only certain types of individuals that would have that capacity for the Vijnana experience? Now, we know in Totapuri's life, he was probably bestowed that by Sri Ramakrishna, by his contact. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. But before I comment on that, I'd like to quibble with my guru, if I dare. Because Swahanandaji makes it seem as if Jnana, he's clearly implying that Jnana is a state of oneness and Vijnana is not. I think that's false. I think both are states of oneness. That's one of the main things I'm trying to argue in my scholarly work. And I think it's very clear if you study Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on Jnana and Vijnana that both are Advaitic states, but different kinds of oneness. Jnana is a oneness, you can call it a kind of exclusive oneness. It's the oneness of non-dual pure consciousness to the exclusion of everything else. Jivas are unreal, the world of names and forms is unreal, the personal God is unreal. And the Vijnana is an all-inclusive oneness. That's why my next book, as part of so the 2 books that I'll be signing today are the first 2 books in what I call my integral Advaita trilogy. I'm arguing that 3 major figures in modern Hinduism, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and the third, you may not be able to guess, Sri Aurobindo, have developed a new school of integral Advaita within Vedantic thought. Okay. And the book's title is so I've written the first 2 books. I've signed a contract with Oxford for the 3rd book on Sri Aurobindo, but I told them I won't submit the manuscript until end of 2027, so that gives me plenty of time, I hope. But I've set the title already. You have to set the title for the contract. An all-embracing oneness. Sri Aurobindo's integral Advaita and the legacy of Sri Ramakrishna. An all-embracing oneness or an all-encompassing oneness. That's the idea. That's the Vijnana oneness. Both are oneness, but one is exclusive, the other is inclusive, all inclusive. Now, that's the quibble with my guru. Now I come to the main question. Sri Ramakrishna used to say in the gospel, who is capable of attaining Vijnana? Typically only Ishvara Kotis. He used to distinguish two classes of jiva. Jiva Koti, by which he means ordinary jivas, most of us, presumably, and Ishvara Kotis. How did he define Ishvara Koti? Avatar ba avatarer angsho. He gives a very precise definition. What's an Ishvara Koti? Incarnations of God and those born or who have come as portions of an incarnation. Avatarer angsho, amsha, avatar, the amsha of an avatara or an avatara itself, himself or herself. You see. So now that's a very high level thing. He only named five, I think plus two, right? Bhavanath and Purna, and then five future monastic disciples. Six total, is that what it is?
Six-ish Varakotis.
Okay, in any case, six, yeah? Four of whom became monks later, and then two, because there are two household disciples, Bhavanath and Purna also. So I think it's 6 plus 2, maybe 8. I think that might be more accurate. Yeah, 6 plus 2. In any case, out of all the great spiritual souls, he only named those, So being an Ishvara Koti is very rare. But, okay, and it seems like he says in many places that only Ishvara Kotis are capable of attaining the state of Vijnana. At the same time, there are complexities and complications here, nuances. One is Mahapurush Maharaj, Shivananda Maharaj. He was not given the stamp of the Ishvara Koti by Sri Ramakrishna. He mentions that in a letter in Bengali. He says, Amake to Ishvara Koti chaprash daini. He didn't give me that stamp. But by his grace, I've been elevated to the status of an Ishvara Koti. We also just talked about how Sri Ramakrishna elevated Totapuri. Totapuri was not actually an Ishvara Koti. He made him into Vijnani, right? So these categories are not as rigid as you might think. There's a certain fluidity. The border becomes a little bit more permeable than you might think. And I believe as a devotee, now I'm setting aside my scholar's cap and putting on my monastic/devotional cap. I believe that with the advent of the Ramakrishna incarnation, Sri Ramakrishna has made accessible, democratized, universalized this state of Vijnana, which was hitherto an extraordinarily rarefied state meant only for a chosen few. He has, by his grace, Vijnana is now made attainable, accessible to every one of us, every single one of us. And you'll find that when you read Swami Vivekananda's work. He teaches Advaita Vedanta, no doubt. But what kind of Advaita Vedanta? That's the question. So in my book on Vivekananda, I asked this, and chapter 2 especially focuses on this. When he teaches Advaita Vedanta, it's an all-encompassing oneness, more like Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. He teaches again and again, God in everything. See God everywhere, see God in everything. And he doesn't say this is for a chosen few. Every single person can become a Vijnani, according to Swami Vivekananda and according to Sri Aurobindo. So I think that it's with the advent of the Ramakrishna incarnation that Vijnana has become democratized. And in a sense, every one of us can become a Vijnani. Yeah.
Murat, this incident happened in around 1910, 12 in Banaras. So there was a class that was held on Karma Yoga, and Baburam Maharaj attended that class, and he immediately remarked that this Karma Yoga of Swamiji is actually Jnana Yoga. And Swami Prabhavananda was there. Prabhavananda from our Southern California Center. And he he made that mention in that. So Baburam Maharaj from the epitome of love and is a bhakta, also a Brahma Gyani. From that perspective, merging Karma Yoga into Jnana Yoga, how do we approach that? Because
It's difficult to say. The thing is, as I've already discussed, Jnana Yoga itself means different things in different contexts. Jnana Yoga means one thing in the hands of Ramanuja. It means a totally different thing in the hand of classical Advaitins like Shankara. Now, what did he mean by Jnana Yoga? I think it's up in the air. I think that what he means is that Swami Vivekananda is describing the practice of Karma Yoga in such high spiritual terms that it's not really possible to practice that Karma Yoga properly without already having realized God. I take it in that sense.
Okay.
You have to be a Jnani in that sense. You have to know God.
Yeah.
Now, that could be non-dual Brahman or it could be the personal God. But you have to be a realized soul in order to really practice Karma Yoga properly. That's how I see
Correct.
Premanandaji's
Okay.
comment. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
There's one question online again. Where are we? Okay. Does Parinamavada of Kashmir Vaishnavism similar to integral Vedanta?
Okay, interesting question, but wrong premise. Kashmir Shaivism is a tantric tradition, very sophisticated philosophical tradition, which does not subscribe to Parinamavada. So that's the mistaken question. It's not a whopping mistake. It's not a howling mistake. He's on the right track, he or she. Because Kashmir Shaivism upholds the view of Abhasavada, that this world is an Abhasa of Shiva. It's an appearance of Shiva, but not an illusory appearance. It's a real manifestation of Shiva. So it's neither quite Parinamavada of some of the Bhakti schools of Vedanta, like Ramakrishna school, nor is it's definitely not the Vivartavada of classical Advaita Vedanta. I'm using all these Sanskrit terms, let me explain them. The questioner is talking about Parinamavada. That is, Vada means doctrine, Parinama means transformation. So this is the view that, so the question is, what is the relationship between Brahman on the one hand, ultimate reality, and this world on the other? Parinamavada's answer is, some aspect of Brahman actually transforms into the world. Ramanuja holds this. The cobweb metaphor in the Mundaka Upanishad seems to support this kind of view. Also, Chandogya Upanishad uses two beautiful metaphors, more than two metaphors, but two of the most memorable ones are what? Gold being, molten gold being fashioned into different gold earrings, golden bracelets, and clay, formless clay being shaped into differently shaped clay pots, right? These analogies lend themselves perfectly to a Parinamavada kind of interpretation. And I personally think that Sri Ramakrishna, if you try to categorize him as either a Parinamavadan or a Vivartavadan or a Abhasavadan, I think he comes closest to Parinamavada. Why do I think that? Because if you study the original teachings in Bangla, the gospel, he just says it. He uses the language of transformation. He says, the Vijnani sees Brahma Choturbinshi Tattva Hoyechin. Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. This is, I think, a very direct and literal translation of what he's saying. How do you understand that? How can you possibly say that? That means that the 24 cosmic principles are an illusory appearance of Brahman. No. Brahman has actually become everything in this world. That's Parinamavada, I think. Now, that's Parinamavada. Vivartavada is the doctrine held by classical Advaita Vedantins like Shankara. What's that view? Vivarta means illusory appearance. This world is an illusory appearance of Brahman, just as the snake, which is actually is an illusory appearance of what's actually a rope, like that. That's Vivartavada. So what's their answer to the question? What is the relationship between Brahman and this world? Shankara will say, there is no relationship. It's an illusion that there is a relationship. In fact, this world never was. No world, no problem. There's just Brahman. Okay. But the Kashmiri Shaivite position on the relationship between Shiva, the ultimate reality, Shiva Shakti really, and this world is different from both of these positions. First of all, keep in mind that Kashmiri Shaivism is not Vedanta. It's not a Vedantic school. It's separate. It's Tantra. You see, which doesn't mean that it's totally different from Vedanta, but it means that there are going to be nuances, philosophical nuances in Kashmiri Shaivism that you don't find in Vedanta. So the nuance here is it subscribes to a third doctrine, which is called Abhasavada. Abhasa here means real manifestation. Of course, this is also very controversial, and different scholars of Kashmir Shaivism have different understandings of Abhasavada. It gets very complicated. I'm giving you a nutshell kind of a thing. I think a plausible interpretation is that this entire world is a real playful manifestation of Shiva. This is the Kashmir Shaivite view. Now, the questioner asks, how do what's the relationship between the Kashmir Shaivite understanding of the world and Sri Ramakrishna's? Something that Sarvapriyanji is fond of quoting. We have a mutual friend, Sarvapriyanji and I, Arindam Chakraborty. He's a very prominent scholar of Indian philosophy, and he's an expert in Nyaya and Advaita Vedanta, and to a certain extent, Kashmir Shaivism. And he used to tell me, he also told Sarvapriyanji, Arindam Chakraborty, he said, if you want to understand the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna in the gospel, better to study Kashmir Shaivism than to study Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. So Sarvapanyadi often mentions this in his lectures, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. If you want to pigeonhole him, but I think the best thing is not to pigeonhole Sri Ramakrishna. But if you need to place him in a camp, okay, he comes closer to Kashmir Shaivism than to classical Advaita, you see. But the beauty of Vijnana Vedanta is it's the refusal to pigeonhole. Resist the impulse to pigeonhole Sri Ramakrishna, resist the impulse to stick him into some kind of sectarian framework. Because even Kashmir Shaivism is sectarian at the end of the day. But does it come closer to Sri Ramakrishna's teachings than classical Advaita? Yes, I think to a certain extent. Why? I'll give you examples. One of the keynote teachings of Sri Ramakrishna is Brahma or Shakti Abhed. Non-dual Brahman is inseparable from Shakti, the personal God. Would Shankara agree with this teaching? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, just study his commentary on the Brahma Sutra and you'll see. He says, all of the attributes of Ishvara, omniscience, omnipotence, these are all illusory limiting adjuncts, upadhis, superimposed on non-dual Brahman. When we attain knowledge of Brahman, Ishvara vanishes. It turns out to be an illusory appearance, just as much as these chairs and us as individual souls. You see. So Shankara will not accept that. Where was I going with this? Sorry, remind me of
And the Parinamavada of Kashmiri Shaivism.
Oh, yeah.
Integral to Vedanta.
Yeah. Okay. So Sri Ramakrishna's view now. Yes, Brahma Shakti, that was the thing yeah. So Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. It comes much closer to the Kashmiri Shaivite teaching on ultimate reality. Because what is the Kashmiri Shaivite teaching? The ultimate reality is Prakasha Vimarshamaya. Which means almost literally just a more technical way of saying Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. In a simpler way that the Kashmiri Shaivites put it is Shiva and Shakti are abheda. Shiva and Shakti are one. So it's very difficult to explain Sri Ramakrishna's teaching of the inseparability of Brahman and Shakti from the standpoint of Shankara's classical Advaita, but much easier from the standpoint of Kashmir Shaivism. Second question, what about the nature of this world? Sri Ramakrishna again and again says the world is not unreal. It's a real manifestation of Shakti, of Brahman. Which school does that come closer to? Classical Advaita? No. Why? Because classical Advaita says Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. This world is an illusory appearance of Brahman. It actually never existed. The Sanskrit term for this is ajata, non-origination. This world never was. It's not that it once existed and that we saw it for a certain amount of time and then it disappeared. We never were. All of this never happened. That's the Advaita view. It's very radical. Whereas Sri Ramakrishna says this world is a real manifestation of God. Everything in this world. He had that direct spiritual realization. He's doing puja one day in the Kali temple. What does he see suddenly? The puja vessels, Brahma, or Divine Mother, Divine Consciousness. Chinmoy, he used the word Chinmoy. The door sill, Chinmoy. Cat walks into the room, Chinmoy. Everything is Divine Mother. You see, the world is a real manifestation of God. That comes much closer to the Kashmiri Shaivite Abhasavada than to the classical Advaitic Vivaktavada.
Thank you, Swami.